Hello, everyone, and welcome to Authors Love Bookstores with a Mighty Blaze. I'm Joe Moldover, and I'm so happy to be with you this afternoon. Today, we have Jacqueline Sheehan with us. Jacqueline is a doctoral level psychologist, an essayist, and a novelist. She is the author of 7 novels, most recently Tiger in the House. Her books have been translated into 8 languages, and she's been the recipient of multiple writing fellowships. Jacqueline teaches writing workshops through Writers in Progress in Florence, Massachusetts, Women Reading Aloud with Julie Maloney, Grub Street in Boston, and at international retreats with Patricia Lee Lewis. She is also a founding member of strawdogwriters.org in Northampton. She's currently at work on her 7th novel. She's coming to us today from a writing session. And Jacqueline, I'm so happy to have you here. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Joe. Glad to be here.
And today, Jacqueline has nominated her favorite local independent bookstore, Broadside Bookshop. And we are joined by Broadside's co-owner, Roxy Mack. Roxy, thank you very much for joining us today from Broadside.
Thank you for doing this.
I'm delighted. Broadside's one of my favorites. I was sharing before we went on air that my parents live in Northampton, and going to visit them always involves a visit to Broadside. And it was, I think, the last bookstore I visited before the shutdown. So I'm sort of happy to be sort of virtually back there with you. Broadside, for anybody who hasn't had the pleasure of going, is located on Main Street in the wonderful downtown of Northampton, Massachusetts. And Roxy, I'm just going to start with you, and to let our listeners and our viewers get to know you a little bit better and the bookstore a little bit better, I'm going to ask us if you can just tell us a little bit about where you're coming from. So first of all, Northampton, Massachusetts, I know it well. It's an extremely interesting community. For those who have not had a chance to visit, tell us a little bit about this community that you serve.
Well, it is a pretty amazing town. It's a town full of well-educated, avid readers. And not only do they read, but they are socially and politically aware. We have a lot of activists among our clientele. And we have a lot of creative people in town, like Jacqueline. Artists, writers, every second person you meet is doing something interesting. And the whole community is very supportive of independent bookstores. And you really, in short, couldn't ask for a better town to sell books in.
You're sort of in the middle of the 5 colleges, I think. So, I mean, you just have a huge number of academics and students and people like that. Broadside itself was founded almost 50 years ago, 46 years ago, in 1974. Tell us a little bit about how the shop got started.
Well, it was founded by a man named Bruce McMillan. The 3 current co-owners, worked for him. And we all loved him. He was smart and warm and savvy. And the store started on a shoestring. It grew steadily. It was half its size when it started, and it doubled its size in 1986. And in the early days, we still used index cards for inventory. We mailed orders to publishers. It feels practically Dickensian now to talk about that, but and here we are virtually interacting. I mean, that's the whole span of the years I've been here.
It's a wonderful store. It really has such a unique feel whenever you walk in. You really know that the people who work there love books and think a lot about books and have really creative, thoughtful choices. Can you tell us give us a unique fact about your store? Can you tell us sort of something unique and interesting about your store?
Well, I don't know if it's unique, but I think it's unusual. We have been able to maintain a fairly good balance between having a well-curated inventory of serious, nourishing books, and also a wide variety of sidelines and gifts. And like every other bookstore, we have a mix of personalities.
Yeah.
We have a blend of particular skills. If one person can't do something, another person can. And that kind of gives the bookstore its particular flavor, I think. We try to be kind of who we are. We don't try to be stiff and formal. We just try to be warm to the customers when we can. So that's
Yeah,
who we are.
it comes through. I'm so excited to ask you this next question because it's one I always like to ask bookstores, but oftentimes it's not relevant. But do you have a store mascot, and would you be willing to share them with us?
Oh, do we ever? Here she is.
Oh, there we go. There we go. Now, does she have a name and a backstory?
Well, her name is Virginia Wolf. And we saw her online and we fell in love with her and we had to have her. So here she is.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. I'm embarrassed to say I don't think I've noticed her when I've been in the store myself, but the next time I come, I'll definitely look her up.
She's our greeter. She stays at the front door and she puts her nose out.
I must have walked right by her.
Yeah.
I want to talk. I mean, this is obviously a very unique and difficult situation for independent bookstores all across the country. One question I want to ask is, what have been your top selling books or the most popular books during the COVID pandemic, during everything that's happened in the country over the last weeks and months? What do you observe people are wanting to read?
We, well, like every other bookstore in the world, or in the country right now, we are selling enormous numbers of books on race, white fragility, and My Grandmother's Hands, and How to Be an Anti-Racist. But among fiction titles, the Hilary Mantel book, The Mirror and the Light, was a great seller online as when we were shut down. And The Overstory by Richard Powers just seems to keep on keeping on, just unstoppable. And we're selling a lot of a very lovely book about the natural world called Braiding Sweetgrass, which everybody seems to really love. So I would mention those.
And tell us,
we expect to sell a lot of the Mary Trump book.
Yeah. And tell us, for people who want to pick up some or all of these books, you had mentioned that you are open at this point. You are open for foot traffic?
Yes, we are open to foot traffic, yes.
And are you also still selling online and by phone?
We are indeed doing that, yes. And we are also doing curbside if you're not comfortable coming in.
Yeah, and the link will be in the feed, but it is broadsidebooks.com for everybody at home. Jacqueline, I want to come to you. So you also are in Northampton, and you, when we came to you as a very well-known author and asked you who you would like to nominate for favorite indie bookstore, you said Broadside. Tell us why. What is special about this store?
Well, there's so many things special about it. It's the way that Broadside is really, I think, in our downtown area, it's sort of the heart, the pulse of downtown. It's really the heartbeat of downtown. And the three owners are like the most humble people you're ever going to meet. So they will never own up to any of this that I'm going to say, but it really is true. And, when you come to visit your parents, they probably said, oh, let me take you down to the bookstore. They just call it the bookstore. when people have relatives come to town, they want to take them to Broadside Bookshop. And as a writer, Broadside is fantastic to writers. When Roxy says that, they have a couple of book events per month, in normal times and the before, I kind of think it was more than that.
Yeah.
But in order to have a book launch, like when I've launched my books there, they have to totally transform the bookshop. Their bookcases are on rollers and they move them around, and suddenly they transform the bookshop into this parlor where many, many people can come. I don't know how many people you can squeeze in there, Roxy, but I'm astounded that many people can get in there. And, as a writer, it's a fantastic place to launch a book. It is the warmest environment. And so when the pandemic hit, and at first we thought, oh, it'll be a week, it'll be 2 weeks, it will be a month. And then I thought, oh, I wonder how many of these brick and mortar stores are going to make it. And then I thought, oh, Broadside. We can't lose Broadside. No matter what happens, we can't lose them. So many, many writers and readers in the area, whenever they were posting something on Facebook, I don't know if you ever saw this, Roxy, they would say, remember, you can order books online at Broadside. So we were like, it's from as many angles as we could, kind of sending our feed into Broadside Book.
That's great. That's great. One of the things I love about independent bookstores are the events, the live events. They're so personal. You never know exactly what's going to happen. You mentioned that you've done, I think you said 4 of your 6 launches at Broadside.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a memory of an event at Broadside, whether it was one of yours or whether it's another author's, that was especially memorable that you'd like to share?
Well, I have one that says a lot about Broadside Book. So it could have been the first book launch that I did there, which would have been like my 3rd book. And so the date was set up, and Nancy and Roxy came to me. I'd stopped in the store at some earlier point and said, is there anything I need to do to help you get, publicized? And they said, well, we did have a question to ask you. It's like, we're getting an award for, some wonderful award for being the best bookstore. And they were going to be, at a dinner someplace, and it was going to be very fancy. And they said, it's the night of your book launch, but if you can't change it, we just won't go. And I said, are you kidding me? You guys were really not going to go and accept this award because I couldn't change the date? I was astounded. And of course I did change the date, and they did go and get their award. But I think that stands out to me, that says so much about them.
That's so great. I love that story. A couple of questions that are coming in, but as I told you ahead of time, because I'm the moderator, I get to shove my way to the front of the line and ask the questions that I want to ask. So I'm gonna start to toss out a few. Some of them are mine, some of them are from the audience. Jacqueline, as I mentioned at the beginning, you actually have a very long list of interesting jobs in your bio on your website. But among other things, you are a psychologist. And I'm also a psychologist in my day job. And I wanted to ask you how you feel that being a psychologist informs your work as a novelist.
Mm-hmm. I honestly think it's one of the most helpful careers that I could have had prior to becoming a full-time writer. Because as you know, writing fiction is all about character development and motivation. Why do our characters do what they do? And and that's the air that we breathe as psychologists. Why are people doing what they're doing, especially when it's not serving them well? Mm-hmm. And with fictional characters, usually what they're doing is not serving them well, or they're coming up against something that is so conflictual that it's revealing new parts of them. So I've never felt anything but grateful to be a psychologist than a writer.
Yeah. And you were a psychologist before you became a fiction writer?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Or yeah, me too. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Question from the audience, and either one or both of you can feel free to take this one, but people would like to know what you are reading right now and if you have anything that you would recommend to the audience.
Roxy, I've got one.
Okay.
So, I just went down to Broadside Book yesterday and I said, I'm going to go down there and buy a book because I want to buy a book the day before we get together on here. And so many people had recommended The Nickel Boys by Colton Whitehead. I just cracked the cover of it this morning and I can't wait to read it.
It's a great recommendation. Roxy, is there anything that you want to give a shout out to?
I just finished Circe by Madeline Miller.
Oh yeah.
Which is incredibly well done. It doesn't condescend to people who already know the story, but it really fills it out. It really gives it a feminist cast, and it's very beautifully written. I do recommend it.
Yeah, that's a beautiful book.
Yeah,
that's great. Jacqueline, question for you, and this is a little bit more of a writerly question, sort of like a craft question. You shared coming on that you'd had a good writing day, so that made it a good day. And I think a lot of people who are writers are really struggling to write during the pandemic, during sort of quarantine. And one thing our audience always wants to know about is, was it difficult for you when things first shut down, and what have you been able to do to overcome that and to keep being creative?
It was really hard in the beginning. And even though, I work at home, I work in my writing studio, so my life was not as different due to the pandemic as someone who it teaches in a high school, or they're working in a bank and suddenly they're home. I do work at home, but even so, it was really like this gray cloud came in and just settled over everything, not knowing what was going to happen, who was going to die, who was vulnerable, who was not, what was going to be left when we're pandemic is done with us or we're done with it. So it took me about a month really to start to come back from that and feel like I could start a new project. But it was very slow. It was very, very slow. And it was really not until this past, I would say the past month, that I have felt like really excited about making these editorial changes on this 7th novel. I had some just great suggestions from my agent that I'm very happy with. And I love that feeling. I love the feeling of, oh, I'm going to change this entire person from third person to first. Okay, I know what I'm doing. One foot in front of the other now.
Right, exactly. Another question that could be for either one or both of you, it's a jump ball, but Broadside Books is, as you said, such an important part of the Northampton community. What is the role of an independent bookstore in a community, especially during times like this, which I think alludes to sort of everything that's happening in our society right now, culturally, and in terms of the pandemic and so forth? But what is the role of the independent bookstore? That's for either one of you.
Well, if we had been open, it would have been a place for people to meet and talk. Normally, that is part of our role in the community. During the closure, of course, that wasn't possible, but I really felt people's hunger for books.
Mm-hmm.
People really wanted to read. They really felt deprived without books. And I felt that was the important thing that we could do for them is
Yeah.
to provide them with books in hand.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jacqueline, do you have any thoughts about that in terms of what role an independent bookstore needs to be playing during difficult times in a community?
You know, I have mostly lived in college towns as an adult, so there's always been a bookstore in the town. And it's just as Roxy says, you know, it's where people, it's like it's a magnet of some kind, and people come there because, you know, they're sort of burning with this desire to read. And they usually want to have a bit of a conversation with the booksellers too. You know, and they always oblige us. Um, but I lived in one town that did not have a bookstore. This could not sustain a bookstore. And it was really like a book desert, a literary desert. And I would never want to live in a town without a bookstore like Broadside again.
Oh, yeah, that's great.
Mhm.
Jacqueline, question for you from the audience, and you should feel free to say no to this, but people would like to know if you will talk about your current project.
Sure. So it is a book that was a story that's inspired by some research that I did about German American Bund camps in the around 1937-38 that had strong Nazi overtones. The Nazi Party was very integral in our country at that time, and they had a huge impact. Our country could have gone a very different direction. So once I found out about these German American Bund camps, which were allegedly family camps and camps for kids, and there was about 25 of them in the country, and they were very strategically placed, some in New York State, Connecticut, California, the Midwest. And they were designed for the day, and the day was when the Third Reich would win. They were, you know, kind of mowing everybody over in Europe, and the thought was that the one thought was that might happen here too. So I found this just so incredible, this little nugget of history so incredible, that I have formed a novel around it. So it is a fictionalized version of a young woman coming in contact with this one particular Bund camp in Connecticut in 1937.
That sounds fascinating. That's a chapter in history I didn't know anything about, and that sounds completely fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's great. We are starting to run down on time. We'll do two more questions. I'll do one for each of you. Roxy, the online audience is wondering about events at Broadside. Are you doing online events at this point, or what's the event situation?
We are trying to get our feet wet about online events. We are novices in this area, and we have a number of things in the pipeline, and we will be putting them on the website once we finalize things. A number of local authors have books coming out this fall, and we're hoping to accommodate them with events.
Great. Okay. So the website, and then do you have a newsletter? I thought I saw one on the website.
Yes, there will be newsletters.
Newsletter, yeah, great. So people can stay up to date on that.
Yeah.
And Jacqueline, back to you, and this is something that I'm going to dovetail my own question with. Your novels have a very strong sense of setting and location. What role does location play for you when you're writing? Do you always talk about places that you've been? And then I will add to that, as I said to you at the beginning, one of my favorite places in the world is Peaks Island in Maine. And I think that you've set 2 books on Peaks. So I wonder if you would talk about location in general and maybe say a few words about Peaks in particular.
Oh, Peaks Island. It is one of my favorite places also. And I don't know if you remember that old TV show, Northern Exposure.
Yeah.
Very quirky characters who just came from all walks of life. That is what Peaks Island is like for me. I mean, you just never know who you're going to run into on Peaks Island. A physicist who's named stars, is, sort of strolling along on Peaks Island. But so it gave sort of this quirkiness to the background when people, my characters were needing to remodel themselves. And Peaks Island is really the best environment for that if you're going to remake yourself.
Yeah, yeah. Have you been to the Umbrella Cover Museum?
No, I usually I have not. I guess you have. I love to go there off season. I like to go there in the dead of winter.
Oh yeah.
The fall, the spring. Yeah. And they're
You know,
closed then.
yeah, no, I love off-season visits too. In the summertime, you've got to visit the Umbrella Cover Museum. It's extremely unique. Anyway, that is wonderful. We are running down on time. I want to thank you both so much for being here with me today and for having this conversation. I can't wait until I'm able to be back in Northampton and to visit the store and maybe to run into you, Jacqueline.
Yeah, give us a call when you come.
Absolutely. I want to remind our online audience, broadsidebooks.com. They are open for in store. They're also still providing online and curbside, and will soon be providing information about online events. JacquelineSheehan.com is Jacqueline's website. It's where you can find all about her interesting biography and about her books, and keep up to date for her upcoming 7th novel, which sounds like it's going to be absolutely fascinating. I want to thank you both. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today and for joining us for another edition of Authors Love Bookstores with a Mighty Blaze. I'm Joe Moldover, and we will see you next week. Until then, stay healthy and keep reading.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Roxy.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Jacqueline.